Do you have a small fish tank and are thinking about different ideas on what to put in them? Well, today I'm going to give you 5 different stocking ideas for your small aquarium. Now, for the purposes of this video, we're going to talk about tanks between 5 gallons and 20 gallons. Some people might say that 5 gallons is a nano aquarium, and some people might say that 20 gallons is a medium-sized aquarium, but for the purposes of this video and for the stocking, we're talking about tanks between 5 and 20 gallons, depending on that type of fish. Now, the first tank that I'm going to suggest is the Nano planted aquascaped aquarium. That's quite the mouthful, but basically what we're looking at is we're looking at a small aquarium that is beautifully scaped, that's going to have community fish in them. So obviously you want to focus on the hardscape and the plants, and then we'll also talk about the fish. Now, as you think about setting up this aquarium, it's probably a good idea to maybe draw it out on paper to kind of lay out how you think you're going to build it, or even take the empty tank and kind of structure things around to kind of give you some ideas. Now, when it comes to plants, it's very important to think about where you're putting the plants in the aquarium. Generally speaking, you want to put the smaller types of plants at the front and the medium or larger plants in the back of the aquarium, because that's going to give you the right kind of dimension and scale. When it comes to hardscape, that's something that you really need to think about, and usually if you go with a larger piece, it's going to give you that better desired effect when it comes to the aquascaped fish tank. Now, when it comes to fish, I'm going to give you ideas on schooling fish, maybe some bottom dwelling fish, and a cleanup crew. For the schooling fish, I'm going to recommend either some tetras or some rasboras, maybe some neon tetras. They really look good with those reds and blues against the planted background. You could also do something like the green neon rasboras, and you could even do something like the pseudomogil furcata rainbow fish. For the bottom part of the aquarium, I'm going to recommend a group of pygmy corridora, maybe like some panda corridora. They really look good in a group of around 6, kind of swimming around together, foraging for food. Really does add a good element to the aquarium. Something that you could also consider would be a couple of autocinclus in there to kind of help keep the algae and things off of the plants, and maybe even a cleanup crew with some Amano shrimp or some cherry shrimp and some snails. They would all complement the community tank quite well. The next tank that I'm going to suggest is the Centerpiece Tank. Now, a Centerpiece Tank is a tank where your focal point, your visual focus is going to be on one main fish. Now, in a smaller tank, obviously you're not going to have a large fish in there. You want to have something that's small to medium size, but basically you want to have all your attention drawn to that fish. Now, you can have other fish in there as long as they're kind of more complementary and not the main focus. One suggestion is going to be a betta. Betta make great kind of centerpiece fish in smaller aquariums. Lots of different colors to choose from, blues and reds and whites and purples and kind of everything in between. For a betta, you are going to want to make sure that you are using a heater and a filter. Now, some people kind of think that bettas, just because you see them in the pet stores, can be in small little jars or very small containers. But unless you're a breeder or unless you're doing water changes every day, you really shouldn't keep bettas in the small aquariums, but more so focused on putting them in a regular aquarium environment where they're going to thrive. So make sure that they do have a heater and a filter. Another fish that you can consider would be a gourami, something like a honey dwarf gourami, a powder blue gourami, a dwarf neon gourami. Any of the smaller gourami species, they'll do better in maybe 10 gallons and up, where with the betta you could put them in a 5-gallon tank. For both of those centerpiece fish, both the gourami and the betta, you're probably not going to want to have shrimp in them. Some of you might have success with them, but for the most part, the baby shrimp would get predated upon by the gourami or the betta. Now, one thing to remember when you are doing a centerpiece fish is you want to create the aquarium to where, again, that focal point is drawn towards a fish. So you don't want to have a jungle type of aquarium where you've got plants growing up all over the place and the fish is hard to see. It's tucked away in the back or hiding behind some plant. You want to make sure that you're creating it so your kind of visual effect is drawn towards the middle of the aquarium and the fish has plenty of space to swim. So when you're scaping that aquarium, you might want to put the plants in the hardscape along the sides or the back of the aquarium so that you can have that visual effect with that centerpiece fish. My next suggestion is going to be the shrimp tank. Now, if you're new to shrimp, I would recommend trying Neocaridina like cherry shrimp. They're usually pretty easy, readily available. Most people have success with them if you have decent water parameters, and they're very easy to replicate because they do breed in your aquarium. If you're newer to shrimp keeping and you're not quite sure, I would avoid Caridina as they are a little bit more difficult for beginners. Usually the water parameters are needing to be a little bit more spot on and might be difficult to replicate, so avoid Caridina if you're brand new and maybe start start off with some Neocaridina. Now, one good thing about shrimp is they don't need a heater. They can actually survive in cooler temperatures, so your regular room temperature in your home would be just fine. They don't need to be in tropical temperatures. Now, having an established tank can make it easier. So if you're setting up a brand new tank, you might want to wait a while. Obviously, you're going to want to make sure that that aquarium is cycled, but you might want to wait a while to ensure that the tank is kind of seasoned and established so that you have, some algae growing and some microfauna for the shrimp to graze upon, and you'll probably have better success with that. When it comes to water parameters, neutral pH is fine, medium to hard water. So if you have very soft water, you're going to want to make sure that you have some added calcium in the aquarium because the shrimp are going to need that for their exoskeleton. The next tank on my list is one of my favorites, the shell dweller tank. Now for the shell dwellers, even though we're talking about small aquariums, I'm going to suggest not doing a 5-gallon tank. That's going to be very difficult. It can be done in 10 gallons, probably better if you're going a little bit larger, like a 20-gallon or 20-gallon long. Now, shell dwellers are amazing little cichlids from East Africa. They come from Lake Tanganyika, the Rift Lake in East Africa. They do have a lot of personality and a lot of activity in the aquarium. They're kind of like the little builders of the aquarium hobby. So no matter what you do as far as escape is concerned, they're going to dig mounds and move things around. So you pretty much kind of let them do what they want to do as far as how the tank is set up. But they are a lot of fun and very enjoyable to keep. Now, the important part with shell dwellers is you need to have shells in the aquarium. The best shells to use are empty escargot shells. First of all, they're food grade. You can use them to eat at a restaurant. You can buy them on Amazon or restaurant supply stores. Shell dwellers actually use the shells to raise their fry, to spawn, to hide from predators, and it's a huge part of their day-to-day life, so you want to make sure that you put a lot of shells in the aquarium. Now, when it comes to shell dwellers, you want to have more shells than fish when you're starting out. So maybe if you're starting out in a 20 long and you're putting, let's say, 5 or 6 shell dwellers in there, you're going to want 3 to 4 shells per fish. So if you're putting in 5, you're going to want at least 15 to 20 shells to put in there to make sure that every fish has a shell. Some males kind of might corral a little area and they want to have a few for themselves and their females. So the more the better when it comes to shells in the shell dweller tank. One thing that will help is when you set up the aquarium and you have a bunch of shells along the bottom is to put some type of rock with maybe a plant growing out of it, like a rock with some Java fern or Anubias, so that you have a line of sight break, meaning that if you have fish on this side and fish on this side of the aquarium, they can't see each other because there's a big rock or decoration in the middle, so they won't be going back and forth fighting with one another. They'll be kind of focused on their own area. Shell dwellers are very easy to feed. They'll pretty much take any type of fish food, and they spawn readily, so it's a lot of fun to see that new life happen in your aquarium. The fifth idea for a small aquarium is going to be the breeding pair aquarium. For a breeding pair aquarium, you're going to want at least 10 gallons. 15 or 20 is going to be better, but you can do it in a 10-gallon tank. And I would recommend a pair of Apistogramma. Now, there are many different types of Apistogrammas. Apistogramma is a dwarf cichlid that comes from South America. Very brilliant coloration on most of them, but I would recommend maybe Cockatoides or Agassizii because they're readily available and they are going to give you those brilliant colors that you might want to see in your smaller aquarium. Now, one thing to make sure of is to make sure that you have a male and a female, obviously, but when you're buying fish, make sure that you are getting a male and a female. If you're buying them very young, you might not be able to sex them right away, so you might need to buy more than a pair and let them pair off and then rehome the others that are extras, or just ensure that they're older and old enough for you to be able to see the sex of the fish, and then just make sure that you have a male and a female. Males are going to be a little bit larger, they're going to have longer finnage and a much more coloration, where females generally are going to be a little bit more drab in coloration and a little bit smaller, so they should be easy to see males versus females once they're grown, but when they're smaller it's a little bit more difficult. Now, important part to make sure you have in your Apistogramma breeding tank is to make sure that you have some type of hut or a cave. It could be something that's made out of ceramic that's made specifically for Apistogramma or dwarf cichlids. It could be something like an empty coconut husk with a hole drilled into it. And basically what you want is some kind of little hut or a house, a fish house, that they can use to spawn and raise their fry. The hole should be small, just big enough for the male to kind of barely be able to fit in there, but not a very large hole. If you're buying an Apisto hut that's already made, then those holes are pre-drilled. If you're making your own, just do your research and make sure that the hole's the appropriate size for the fish that you're getting. Now, in addition to the coconut hut or the cave or whatever you're using for the Apisto house, you want to have some live plants in there. The live plants really do help with water quality. They also obviously look a lot better with aesthetics, and they're going to offer some cover for the growing fry. Hopefully this video gave you some stocking ideas for your small aquarium. Comment down below if any of these have inspired you, or if you have some different ideas. To see some more stocking ideas for a 10-gallon aquarium, watch this video right here. And don't forget to enjoy nature daily.